Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. Welcome back to the DPUB Summit 2023. We hope you enjoyed the first session this morning. We have another inspiring presentation lineup for you, and I'm delighted to introduce our next speaker, Daniel Weck, a software engineer working for EDRLab and the DAISY Consortium. In this session, Daniel will take us on a journey into the world of Thorium Reader. Thorium is a free and open source software application designed to provide one of the best reading experiences for various publication formats, including EPUB, DAISY, audiobooks, Divina, comic books, and PDF. With its user-centric design and a strong focus on accessibility, Thorium aims to ensure a seamless reading experience for all users, including those with print disabilities. Daniel will discuss the technical challenges involved in developing Thorium and highlight its user-friendly features. He will also share the future plans for Thorium, giving us a glimpse into the exciting development that lies ahead. Before we begin, please remember that this session will be recorded, allowing you to revisit it later or share it with others who couldn't join us today. And as always, EDRLab members will receive a written synthesis of this session, providing you with the insights after the event. We also would like to extend our appreciation to our sponsors, Radium, Glassbox, AudioBoost, and DPUB for their support, which makes this summit possible. And I'm now giving the floor to Daniel Weck.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Loud and clear? Yeah, I guess so. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. All right, we're on. So I hope you had, for those of you who are in the European time zone, I hope you had a great lunch, a good drink, and that you're ready for another afternoon of fascinating presentations, hopefully mine as well. So it's officially summer since yesterday, so I thought it would be fitting to have a slide reminding us of how beautiful time of the year it is. Unfortunately for me, I suffer from pollen allergies, so I will have my box of tissues next to me, and I might have to mute myself once in a while to sneeze. Hopefully not too many times during this presentation. So I'm Daniel Weck. I'm a software engineer. Historically, I've been working with the DAISY Consortium and EDRLab, of course, as well. And in the past, I was involved with the Radium Foundation. So I've been working in this space for a number of years now, well over a decade. I'm one of the lead developers in the Thorium project. We're a very small team, so I'm here to represent us today. So many of you probably already know about Thorium, but for those of you who don't know much about Thorium, I'm going to give you some background information. And for those of you who are already familiar with Thorium, I hope you'll get to enjoy discovering new features and all the good things that have been introduced since our last presentation last year at the Digital Publishing Summit in Madrid. So Thorium is an application for desktop operating systems, that is Windows, Mac, and Linux. It's open source. It's available at our GitHub website. The latest official version is 2.2.0, published in November 2022, but since then we've been frequently publishing beta test releases. Again, available on our website at GitHub. So here on the left-hand side, you can see an official release 2.2. If you scroll down, you'll get to see the changelog and quite a comprehensive description of what makes this particular release interesting. And on the right-hand side here, you can see the website with the release section where we publish the automated builds for Mac, Windows, and Linux. We don't publish a changelog for these, so if you have any questions, any doubts as to what's new in those intermediary beta test releases, don't hesitate to ask. You can go to our Slack channel, or more conveniently, you can use the GitHub website. We have a discussion forum in there. And of course, if you have issues to report, you can use the GitHub website as well to interact with us. Yeah, one quick word about Thorium 2.2. So on the screen here, we see that it has been downloaded just a little under 50,000 times. That's for the 2.2 release. We also have some basic statistics from the Windows Store. This is where we publish Thorium as well. And we don't gather sophisticated analytics from Thorium. We roughly know how many people download it, how many users we have. Whenever the application is launched, we gather that sort of information. We call it telemetrics, but it's very basic. So we're hoping that the next version will be as popular as the previous one has been. And without further ado, let's move on to the next slide, because excitingly, Thorium now has a website at thorium.edrlab.org. It's basically a simple about page and a much more comprehensive documentation section, where you will find a lot of useful information on how to use Thorium, what to expect from it. The list of keyboard shortcuts is listed there. In the future, I think we're hoping to merge the documentation into Thorium itself, so that if you don't have an internet connection, you might be able to just browse the documentations from within the app itself. But please note that at the moment, this is an online piece of documentation that's not shipped with the application. On the plus side, it's always up to date. So whenever we publish a fix to it, or Gauthier does, Gauthier is with us today on the presentation as a moderator. He's also in charge of maintaining that website, the documentation. And thanks to him, we have English and French languages. Contributions welcome. Again, use our GitHub website if you want to contribute translations for the documentation. Speaking of translations, Toby now supports 20 different locales. I will not read through all of them, but I will point out at the latest 2, Greek and Bulgarian. Since last year, since the last Digital Publishing Summit, we've got 2 new translations. And translations are regularly updated as well by our very generous contributors, so we very much appreciate this. I'd like to point out a particular language in this list, Japanese, because we are working on improving support for vertical writing mode and right to left page progression, as shown on the screen on the left here. We have rudimentary support for Japanese already, but it needs improving, and this year we have the budget to do so. So we're going to be delivering improvements in that department. On the right-hand side here, you can also see that the book metadata is already supported in Japanese. So Thorium, for those of you who don't know, supports a number of publication formats. That has not changed since last year. So we are focusing on EPUB 2 and EPUB 3, DAISY digital talking books, version 2 and 3, audiobooks in the W3C and Regium formats. I will show you a slide later on regarding audiobooks, and I'll make a comment about it. We support Divina digital comics. We had a few presentations this week about comics. Again, not a particularly widespread format. It's sort of bleeding edge, but we're glad to have it in Thorium as a platform to experiment with these new, sophisticated, user-friendly formats. We also have basic support for PDF, so don't expect the greatest PDF reader, but it's in there. Saves you switching to a different app if you want to stick with Thorium. Going back to the top of the slide, EPUB 3, reflowable, and fixed layout are supported. So fixed layout means fixed pages, a bit like PDF. I'll show you an example later on. And we also support media overlays, which is a technical term that means synchronized text and audio. So as the audio plays, the text is highlighted on the screen at the same time. All right, so I'm sure many of you are familiar with this sort of interface. This is Thorium's main window. We call it the library window. This is where we have the local bookshelf for the books that are stored locally on your computer. And it's also where the OPDS online catalogs can be accessed through authentication. You can log into your library and access the books in your account. From there, we support LCP rentals. And of course, there's a huge catalog of free public domain books as well, accessible via OPDS. So that's another view. I presented it last year. I announced it last year at the Digital Publishing Summit. It's the alternative view to the standard default bookshelf. I'll come back to it in a minute. An interesting point about it is that in the year that has passed, we haven't really received much feedback about it. And because we don't gather analytics, we don't track our users' behavior, we don't track usage inside the application, we're not entirely sure whether it's a popular feature or not. So yeah, don't hesitate to chime in the discussion forums on GitHub if you have anything to say about it. It's a very useful view to browse large collections of books, and I'll come back to it nearer the end of this presentation. Again, a very familiar view. This is a two-page left and right typical spread view with a toolbar at the top and a navigation bar at the bottom. And because Thorium is a desktop app, we have this great screen real estate, that we can use. So on a 20-inch display or more even, I can have multiple windows side by side. I can open different books, for example, one in particular language and the same book in different language, so I can do comparative studies. I can also open the same book at different chapters or different sections, so I can compare perhaps for typos or stylistic issues. So that Thorium in that respect is a useful tool for studying or for checking the quality of books during the authoring process. Again, this is the reader view, but this time as a user, I prefer a dark, high contrast style. Maybe I have a reading impairment, or maybe I'm on a very large display and I'd rather use larger fonts. I may want to increase the line spacing and use a different typeface. Here in this case, it's a typeface that helps with dyslexia. So as you know, Thorium allows users to customize the way publication documents look, the way they're rendered. Another interesting point in this screenshot is that if you look carefully on the right-hand side, there is a scroll bar. The book is shown as a scrolling viewport, just like on the web. When you browse a web page, 99% of the time, it will be a vertical scrolling page, and some users prefer that to a paginated look, so we offer that option as well. This is a EPUB3 fixed layout book. Very popular book. Obviously, this is a static image, but you have to imagine the page on the left is animated, all the characters bounce and cheer. On the right-hand side, we have some text that can be interacted with. As the user, I can click on the text and it will speak, or I should say, the frog or the toad above the text, I'm not sure if it's a frog or a toad, will speak the text, and the highlight of the text will be synchronized with the speech. And that is the media overlay feature I mentioned earlier on. This is another fixed layout book, but if you pay attention to the top toolbar and the bottom navigation bar, you can see that much less is shown. This is what we call the Chrome. Chrome is just a term for the elements of the graphical user interface that are shown in and around the content viewport, the book itself. And here we're in full screen mode. We call it an immersive mode or a distraction-free mode, where once I go full screen, the controls at the top and at the bottom, the application Chrome, fade out. And as soon as I move the mouse, they appear again, so I can control page progression or leave the full screen mode. Again, this is a fixed layout EPUB, which features synchronized text and audio. it's a static image, but you have to imagine that as the little girl speaks, the text progresses across the screen and pages turn automatically as part of the listening experience. Speaking of audio, this is an audiobook being played in Thorium. Now, I thought it would be interesting to bring this up in this presentation, not because I have a lot to say about it, but because since last year, not much has happened. In that we haven't got much feedback about how much people use Thorium for listening to audiobooks. And we're well aware that the experience on mobile devices, as presented this morning by Michael, for example, is much more appealing. The experience of listening to audiobooks whilst driving the car or whilst commuting to work in the train, it makes a lot of sense to use a phone for this. Obviously, in a desktop app on a computer with a big screen, it's perhaps not the main use case for Thorium, but it is there. And although we don't have a ton of feedback from it, it's pretty stable and it does work. Now, it supports as I mentioned before, the W3C and Medium audiobook formats, which are kind of bleeding edge. They're not exactly mainstream yet. So perhaps that explains why there's not such an uptake of this particular feature. Our accessibility story is good. Obviously, we can always do better, and accessibility is always at the top of our priority list. But it is pretty good. We score 100% at EPUBTest.org tests. I should caveat that by saying excluding the annotation feature, which is tested for, but we don't implement it yet. It's under development. It will be shipped this year. We have funding for it, and we're going to work hard to deliver an annotation feature in Thorium. It's a well-anticipated feature, so we're very keen to ship it. Just want to highlight 4 essential areas. Keyboard use, of course. I'll show you a screenshot in a moment related to that. Text-to-speech, read-aloud experience that's built into Thorium itself, in addition to supporting screen readers. We support NVDA, JAWS, VoiceOver and Narrator. We do rely on external testing a lot for screen readers. One, because I'm a sighted user, just in case you can't see me, I'm sighted, so I'm not an expert with screen readers. And of course, we like to work with people who know what they're doing, experts in the field, so people who are themselves screen reader users. So we really appreciate the contributions in that space too. And the last point here, as I said before, users can customize fonts, line spacing, word spacing, the colors, and so forth. Speaking of accessibility, recently, on the 25th of May this year, EPUB Accessibility 1.1 was released at W3C. So this is a specification that details how to handle publication metadata, how to publish it, and how reading systems and other tools in the supply chain, such as portals, website, libraries, how to display this information. So in Thorium, we display accessibility metadata inside the information panel for publications. The screenshot here is a bit nonsensical. It's a test book, so it kind of dumps all kinds of metadata on the screen. It's just so that we can demonstrate that it works. But there are actually large corpuses of publications nowadays that do supply useful accessibility metadata. So it is a very important aspect. For example, in Thorium, that will help users perhaps do a search in their bookshelf for all the books that are screen reader friendly, or all the books that do not have hazards such as flashing images, or all the books that confirm to a particular level of the WCAG specification. So we don't have these search tools in place just yet. We have the basic framework in place to implement that during the year. Earlier on, I showed you the sophisticated bookshelf. I will come back to it later in this presentation. This is where we would like to plug in search for accessible metadata. Search or filtering, just a way of filtering the bookshelf based on accessibility criteria. Still talking about accessibility, although I myself, as a sighted user, I love to use the keyboard. So for me, keyboard shortcuts are very important. And we do have a keyboard shortcut editor so that if the default keyboard shortcut set or preset doesn't suit you on your platform, or if you have conflicts with your screen reader or some other assistive technology, you can use the built-in editor to customize, to tweak the keyboard shortcuts. Advanced users can do it in a configuration file, but we provide a really convenient user interface to do it very easily. The reason I'm presenting this today, the feature has existed for some time now. In fact, I presented it last year, but we've improved the accessibility of the user interface quite a lot. As you can imagine, we've got about 50 different keyboard shortcuts, maybe a bit less. So it can be a bit confusing for a screen reader. And I think we've improved that quite a lot, thanks to the feedback, by the way, that we've received from our users on GitHub. So thank you very much again. A new feature since last year, we added navigation history. So the arrows, left, right arrows, previous, next, in the lower left corner, they're new. They're in addition to the arrows on the lower right corner in the navigation bar at the bottom. And what that does is, say, as a user, I click on the link inside the publication and it takes me to a different chapter or different section, or I use the table of contents and I jump to a completely different chapter, and it's not where I wanted to be, or I forgot where I came from. I can use the back arrow, much like in a web browser, to go back to my previous location. There's no limit as to how deep forward and backwards a user can go. So it's very convenient. We've tested it in a number of scenarios. It works with bookmarks as well. So if I jump to a bookmark unintentionally, it's not what I wanted to do, I can easily come back to where I came from. We've also improved our go-to page, the mechanics of it. We didn't change the user interface very much, but the mechanics of it have improved. So we've got better support for pre-paginated content, such as PDF and fixed layout, as well as referable books that contain information about printed pages, the page breaks in actual printed books. And this can be authored at source in the navigation document, and Thorium handles that very well. Bearing in mind that numbers, from 0 to 1,000 million, they can be page numbers, but page numbers can also be Roman numerals and anything really. The specification allows anything. It doesn't have to be numbers, but Thorium handles that absolutely fine. And if you can't remember whether your book contains Roman numerals or Arabic numbers, the user interface in Thorium shows you what pages are available in the book, so you can just expand the list and choose from the list. The table of content has seen some minor improvements as well. We had it, it was polished last year when we presented it already. We've not had any negative feedback about it, but what we implemented was, in addition to being able to jump from the table of contents into a chapter or a section in the book, we also do the inverse operation. So if, as a user, I turn pages, I go to different chapters and sections, when I then move into the table of content, I'm immediately positioned in the correct section. So I don't have to scroll down huge amounts of headings in my table of contents just to find where I am. Thorium does its best to synchronize the table of content with where I am in the page, in the book, I should say. All of that is accessible via keyboard as well. The blue highlight you can see on the screen here is in fact a focus ring for the keyboard focus. But of course we support mouse interaction as well. Speaking of the reading context, so as a user, I want to know, where am I in the book? So I mentioned the table of content, that's an important one with the headings. But sometimes I just want to have a summary of where I am in the book. And there's a keyboard shortcut for this, or I can use the mouse to get to this dialog. This information dialog shows me the progression in terms of percentage, the current page number. If there are page numbers in the book, it'll show me which one I'm in. And we also have a way of showing the chapter headings so that within a nested hierarchy of chapters and sections, I sort of have an idea of what my path is in the book that leads to the place that I'm, the current reading location. So if we expand that trail of chapter headings, this is how it looks. And these blue underlined links are actually links. I can click on them just like I would with a table of content, and Thorium will take me to the chapter headings that are represented here. The Where Am I feature, as you could see in the previous slide, is intrusive. It will display a pop-up dialog that will obscure the page content of my book. So an alternative to this is a keyboard shortcut that triggers a discrete pop-up, a notification slide out that comes out of the lower left corner here. So visually, it gives me a hint as to where I am in the book, and the notification automatically disappears after, I think, 3 seconds or something like that. But for screen reader users, that's of a particular interest because they're not losing their place in the book by opening, a different window, a modal dialogue. They stay where they are in the book, but they can hear an announcement of where they are in the book. Again, progression in percentage, page number, chapter heading, and so forth. So no transition, we're moving to mathematics. I thought it was worth mentioning in this presentation because great news, Chromium, the open source web browser engine developed by, it's hosted by Google, but it's developed by a community of developers, now supports MathML natively. MathML is mathematics markup language. Historically in Thorium, because of the lack of native rendering, we've been using a library called MathJax, which renders the math for us. So whenever you see nice looking math equations in documents, it's thanks to MathJax. And it's an optional feature. I can turn it on and off in Thorium's settings. What's new now is that because we have native support in the web browser engine that we're using, Chromium, we now have an array of options for our end users. And in some cases, for example, with screen readers, it might be beneficial to turn MathJax off and to let the native Chromium renderer do its work. And the screen reader can then talk to or interact with the web browser engine without the intermediary MathJax layer. So we don't have a ton of feedback yet about this feature, not least because it has not been shipped officially in Thorium. Thorium 2.2 does not include this. It's only available in the beta testing builds. So if this is an area you're interested in, I strongly advise you to download one of our automated test builds and to try out MathJax or native rendering of MathML. Another feature worth mentioning is pop-up footnotes. Hasn't changed since last year, but for those of you who don't know it exists, I wanted to show it today. So yeah, basically in the document, we have a call out, a little link, maybe an asterisk or an upper number next to a word, and we click on that, and instead of jumping to the back of a document or at the end of a publication to see the footnotes, the footnote just appears as a temporary pop-up that I can discard using the escape key or clicking with the mouse. So a lot of users prefer that to moving around the book back and forth. Now, thanks to our new navigation history feature on the lower left corner where you have the next and the previous arrows, this is much less of a problem today. So if I jump into a footnote that's really far back in the book, it's now easy in Thorium to get back to where I came from using the navigation history. But in the past, it wasn't so easy. So pop-up footnotes were a really welcome addition, and some users still prefer that. Pop-up footnotes in Thorium are fully accessible, keyboard, and also in terms of the color scheme, the font size. As you can see on the screenshot, this is a dark mode enabled. A feature that has not evolved drastically since last year is text-to-speech, but we have improved a few things here and there, notably support for multiple languages. So this is a book that has English, Latin, Greek, Italian, German, French, and several other languages. So it's a very interesting book to test, to stress test Thorium. And one of our challenges was, how do we make sure that users can choose their favorite voice for all these languages? It's basically not possible. It would be way too complicated. So what we do in Thorium, we expose a list of voices in the top bar next to the playback buttons. So you can choose your favorite voice in French or English or other languages. And whenever the book contains a different language like Spanish or Japanese, the system will choose a voice on your behalf. There are ways in Windows and Mac and Linux to influence that process, but generally speaking, users will have a preferred or favorite voice in a particular language, and that's what we will apply in Thorium. And in fairness, there are not many books that contain different languages inside the same chapter, but so this is kind of an edge case. So this TTS, text-to-speech rendition, which you see on the screenshot here, is your classic one with the highlights, the highlight of a paragraph in yellow here with an orange underline underneath the words as they're being spoken. But we have an alternative view, here it is, which simplifies the text and shows it as a stream from top to bottom, much like karaoke or captions. So you've got automatic scrolling and the text is bigger and there's no distraction. It's just the text that's being spoken. A feature that we're working on this year, we shipped it as an early preview last year, and we're working this year on improving it. It's image zoom. So many books, scientific books, educational books, they have diagrams and pictures embedded in the text, and sometimes they're a bit too small to read, and it would be convenient to be able to extract them and zoom on them. So the way we implement that currently is using the mouse, cursor, and a keyboard modifier. It's a little bit cumbersome. We want to improve this, but it works, and this is what you end up looking at. Image, full screen or full window, and then just by hitting the escape key or clicking with the mouse, you can go back to the normal text. So it's under development. We're going to improve support for bitmaps, JPEG and other codecs, also for SVG. And that's a bit more challenging, but SVG is a scalable vector graphics format that can be used in EPUB, so we must make sure we support that. Thorium has a text search feature, so you can find text using Control F, typing in the text, and shows all the highlights. We have an accessible list of search results. That's a really important component that allows users to navigate a huge list of search results. Here, for example, we have well over 2,000 search results, but they're paginated into vertical lists that are reasonably sized, so that I can quite easily find my way into the different chapters of the books where my words match. Now, that functionality hasn't changed since last year, but the reason I'm bringing this up is because this year we'll be working on the annotation feature, as I mentioned earlier on, and we'll be using similar mechanics. Annotations is about highlighting text, showing the highlight inside the document, being able to click with the mouse cursor on these highlights being able to navigate the list of annotations in an accessible manner. Here, for example, in a paginated list on the right-hand side. So we'll be reusing the same paradigm, the same user experience to implement accessible annotations. Work in progress, I should say. All right, so going back to the library window, the main window when Toby launches. So this is the sort of standard default view with cards and strips, horizontal strips of for listing the books, where we show the cover image, the title, the author. So it's a very sort of familiar user interface. But as I said earlier on, we support an advanced view, which basically utilizes a data grid with columns and rows. The advantage of that view is that it shows a lot more information in a more condensed manner. And also it means I can click on the column headers to sort information alphabetically or numerically. So for example, here in this example, the column on the right-hand side is the last time I read the book, or I read my books. So I've sorted it in decreasing order here with the arrow pointing down. If I click on the column heading or header, it will switch to increasing order, so I can see the old books first and the new ones last. So as I said, it's an advanced bookshelf view. Because we don't gather analytics, we're not entirely sure whether it's a popular feature in Thorium. So we'd love to hear from you if you have an opinion about it, if you've tried it. It's certainly an area where we know we can improve our user interface, so comments are welcome. But as I said, with bookshelves that have over 100 publications, it's really convenient to be able to paginate the list, to be able to search the title, the author, the description, the various metadata fields, to be able to sort alphabetically or by date, and all of that as well using mouse clicks, simple mouse clicks. So in this example, I have tags, the blue bubbles in the middle there, that tags. These tags are just keywords, and they can be automatically imported from an OPDS feed, or as a user, I can add my own tags in my library. So if I want to tag my books with themes like fiction, science fiction, adventure, romance, literature, as a user, I can click on these little blue bubbles there, and automatically, instantly, this will filter publications that have the same tag. So here's an example where I've clicked on the romance tag, and it shows me 2 books that match that. Again, this is all keyboard accessible and screen reader accessible. So we announce the search results in such a way that screen reader users can hear that and interact with the user interface. And finally, here's an even more condensed view where, as you can see, the cover images have become smaller. We're showing more information on the screen. In fact, if you look carefully at the bottom, there is a scroll bar that can scroll all the way to the right to show me even more information, more columns. And each column is a metadata, right? So a date or the name of the publisher, whether or not the book has DRM, what kind of format it is it audio, fixed layout, and so forth. So again, for advanced users or people who have many books in their library and they need a convenient way to navigate the collection. All right, so I'm nearing the end of the presentation here. So work in progress, as I said, annotations, it's a big block of work this year, and we're really keen to deliver this. Japanese vertical writing mode and right to left pagination is an important one too. It's planned for to be released by the end of the year. Image and SVG zoom should be completed soon as well during the summer. We're also planning on improving the graphical user interface. So we've got quite a lot of work on our plate. We're a very small team, so any contribution is welcome, whether that's translations in the user interface or the documentation, or helping us find bugs. That's always a good thing to have, because as developers, we don't necessarily have time to hunt for all the possible bugs in all the possible platforms and screen reader combinations. So testing is a very welcome contribution. At the end of this slideshow, I've got a few links here, including the brand new Thorium website at EDRLab.org. These slides will be published. They're online, they're HTML, so we will get the link in due time. And I think it's time for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle, for your thorough presentation. It actually already sparked many questions. So we have received questions in the Q&A tool and also some questions in the chat. Maybe I should suggest to first open the one in the Q&A tool if you want to read and reply to those questions.
I'll stop sharing my screen as well. There we are. Q&A, yes, I see it now. Very good question. I love this. So anonymous, whoever you are, I'm afraid not. The short answer is not at this point in time. So you would have to deactivate pop-up footnotes in order for a link to be followed all the way down the back of the book or the end of a chapter. And at that point, the TTS read aloud experience that's built into Thorium will be able to access the contents of the footnote. However, when they're displayed in a pop-up, we do not support that officially. If it works, it's a buggy feature. It's not meant to be working.
And if you could read the question.
Yes, of course. The first
one.
one.
Because I think not everyone is seeing them.
Shall we go to the first one then? Let's see. Okay, I'll read it. So the question is, are you at some time in the future planning on displaying the My Books view series metadata included in the EPUB file, based on the belongs to collection type group position metadata? Right, okay. I will be honest, I can see what you're talking about, but I don't have the technical expertise to produce a meaningful answer. So it's definitely something we need to look into. We do support in the backend the parsing of EPUB metadata for belongs to and a few others, but I will admit there's probably a lot more to look into here. So I'll put that in our tracker, or feel free to do it yourself if you have access to GitHub, please. Marie-Laurence, do you want to read the third question? Shall I do it?
Sure, sure. So Maya Desjardins, is there a way to make pop-up footnotes more accessible for low vision users, something like adjusting text size?
That's right. So as I mentioned in passing during the slide, yes, this is one of the, I would say, a unique feature in Thorium. I'm not aware of many reading systems that do support footnotes that render using the same style as the main content. But for me, it made a lot of sense at the time when we implemented it that it should absolutely match the color scheme, the font size, and the typeface as well. So if I select a typeface that helps me as a dyslexic user, I want to use the same typeface in the pop-up footnotes. The footnotes, generally speaking, are displayed, they occupy a certain amount of space on the display, so we can't use fonts that are too huge. So we have an algorithm to sort of scale it in a particular way. So it's not exactly the same size as the text, but it's near enough.
Thank you, Daniel. And we also have some questions in the chat. First, some people replied about the feature you were showing, or the MathML support, which apparently is good news for a lot of people. And we have a question about this. Does Thorium also accept LaTeX syntax with MathML display?
Okay, I can't see the question myself in any of my screens. But
it's in discussion.
Oh, there's a chat box, isn't there?
There's a chat box as well.
Yes, right. 3 different areas. Okay. No, it's great. Okay, great. So it is good news indeed. MathML support. Now, LaTeX and other formats are supported indirectly. So strictly speaking, we only support MathML. That is to say, it looks like HTML. We're looking at tags with the opening angle brackets and closing angle brackets. So that's part of the HTML specification in EPUB. Indirectly, through MathJax, we can support LaTeX, but it is not something that is recommended by EPUB anyway. As far as I know, EPUB recommends the use of MathML and looking at combinations of what a reading system is capable of doing, like Thorium, by adding MathJax to render or using the native Chromium. But also screen readers have their own, or other assistive technologies have their own mechanism to access math. So I think the baseline really is MathML. Other, I was going to say exotic formats. They're not exotic. Historically, they're extremely relevant. LaTeX is very important. But I think in EPUB, the recommendation, if I'm not mistaken, really is MathML anyway.
Thank you. We also had a question from Marco Ercog. Which type of authentication are supported?
Which type of application? Is that what I heard?
I think it was authentications.
Authentications, that's right. Good question. You're putting me on the spot there. This is quite a complex specification, but we support quite a few of them. We had a contribution a year or two ago to implement a particular type of authentication that certain libraries use. So it's all documented on the website. From the top of my head, I cannot remember the technical terms, so I will not mislead you by making them up. But we support several, including ones that are only used by certain libraries. So if your library or your distribution portal is not supported, please feel free to contact us in the discussion or in the issue tracker.
Thank you. Another question we got was about the annotations, asking if they would be shareable by a server or strictly for private use.
Very good question. So the implementation process for this feature or this feature set, it's more than one feature under the same umbrella, which we call annotations. Ultimately, eventually, yes, the answer is yes. We want to have shareable annotations. Now, you can break this down and say, okay, does that mean that as a user, I can export my annotations from Thorium and share them on a USB stick, on a memory card or something, or send them by email? It could also mean that more transparently or more seemingly, I'd be able to log into my authenticated portal with my own account, email address and password, and I can just click the synchronize button and they'd go in the cloud, and I could then read them elsewhere using other reading systems or using Thorium elsewhere on a different computer. So there's a range of options there. It can get really complicated. So the program that we've got in place is to stage it. So in the first phases of the project, it will be mostly static. We have to nail down the user experience on how to author the annotations, for a user to create the annotations and store them securely and safely and reliably on their computer. Then phase 2 is about exporting them using a standard, not something that we invent ourselves, but a W3C standard that is recognized in the industry, so that the users can export little packages of information that can then be shared with other systems. And further down the line, it's a stretch goal, but integration with existing annotation systems like Hypothesis, for example, is obviously a very desirable goal.
Thank you, Daniel. And I think we'll have the last question. Have the footnotes which are rendered in pop-ups have to be with EPUB type?
Yes. So the EPUB world is very confusing, as all of you know. Over the years, we're talking about a decade more of development in EPUB, and hit and miss. Some features have come and gone. EPUB footnote remains, but it is a feature that's not implemented the same, consistently across reading systems. It's quite frustrating sometimes if I open a book on my Android phone or even on my computer with using a different reading system, such as iBooks or books.app by Apple, for example, just to name one, because it's a popular one that ships by default on Mac. Well, I won't experience footnotes in the same way. So yes, it is based on the EPUB type semantic role that is recommended by the specification. But as you know, the experience, your mileage may vary depending on what reading system you use. So we are opinionated as a development team, and we chose to implement it that way. But other reading systems do it slightly differently.
Thank you so much. And I think it was our last question. We are reaching the end of our sessions. Another one is starting in 5 minutes, so I think we'll end here. But thank you very much, Daniel, for your presentation and all your answers. Everyone, feel free to reach out to us, to EDRLab, to Daniel directly if you have any more questions. Thanks again for this presentation, and see you all at the next panel, which is on assistive technology manufacturers and how to create more accessible content.
Thank you. Bye-bye.